Hi, everybody, and welcome to the March meeting for AITP Atlanta. We are excited to have Jess Kallman as our discussion leader for drones and UAS industry segment. We've got a few things to kind of start the meeting off with. First of all, I want to thank our AITP board of directors, whose efforts are all voluntary and help us put together these events each month. So big round of applause to everybody on the board of directors for all their effort. Virtual round of applause, I suppose. Second, I wanted to talk about, and we'll get over some chapter business real quick, but we have some exciting stuff from a membership drive going on right now. As most people know, our annual fee for our membership is about $89. And since we've been virtual and not meeting and doing the handshaking, the networking at the Atlanta Perimeter Marriott, our costs are a little bit down. So we've actually cut our annual membership down to $40. Our membership will remain $40 for that annual membership until we go back face-to-face or a hybrid thereof. So please take advantage of that $40. As an added incentive, we have partnered with Inspire EDU. We have a goal of 75 new members. We are at 36 currently, and that will yield a $500 donation. And if we can get up to 100, we will actually give a $1,000 donation to the organization. And just to make you feel a little bit better about the membership and all the benefits that come up with, I'd like to introduce Richard Hicks, the CEO of Inspire EDO, to tell you a little bit more about the great stuff that they have going to help out in the community. Richard?
All right. Thanks, Steve. Thank you, AITP. It's great to reconnect with you again. And it's like coming back to the family. I was an AITP member in college, so I'm actually very familiar with the work that goes along there, and also the commitment that you make to the community. And I've been with the organization for 13 years. Inspire EDU is always focused on equitable access to technology and training in our underserved community. And we've seen that through COVID, how the underserved community has to have this sort of resource when it comes to technology and training. We can't act like it's something that doesn't exist anymore. I've been evangelizing this work for 13 years, and we have always focused on making sure that the digital divide, having those technology resources, the training is provided to these families that are looking to get more technology savvy. Everything we're doing now involves digital literacy. It's not something that is made up. We have a lot of schools that are using portals so that you can access kids' grades, and we got online banking, and we've got all other types of job placements and things that happen. And so when you talk about those sort of things, the underserved community has to have that sort of resource. And so Inspire EDU, we focus to make sure that we can kind of bridge that gap. We don't want learning loss to happen, and we don't want technology loss to happen either. It's something that our community needs. And so I was reading an article where equitable access to technology and training needs to be on the forefront when it comes to basic needs now. It's not something that is just a nice to have. If you don't have that sort of resource or that sort of training, then you're already behind. You may not have an opportunity to go to that next level that we want them to reach. And so at Inspire EDU, we partner with organizations that are community-based, organizations that serve the underserved community, Title I schools that are 75% free and reduced lunch. And we work to engage that sort of learning. And so we do that through our Learning Spark initiative. Our Learning Spark initiative is our 3 pillars. Family learning. We always believe that the family dynamic it has to be involved in the learning journey when it comes to their child. We also like to focus on STEM through our STEM programming, where we teach the kids how to do different STEM programs and how to get that exposure that's needed so they can end up with jobs and members at organizations like AITP. But also the adult digital literacy is so important not to leave the adults behind, because they have a serious role in making sure that their student or their scholar moves forward. And so with that, we actually have been doing this work in Atlanta for 13 years, and we we are going to continue to serve our underserved community, as we've seen through COVID, that is something that has to be a focus. And Inspire EDU, we're going to continue to maintain that focus.
That's great, Richard. And I know that there's a couple of ways that folks can help Inspire EDU support the organization as a whole. If you wanted to maybe just throw out a little bit about how our audience might be able, because I know there's donations as far as old equipment and whatnot. How can people go about supporting the organization besides becoming a member for AITP and help fatten up the donation from the organization?
Absolutely. So the biggest thing that we need is exposure. So what we ask our audience to learn more about us, find out if we can be a passion. We would be honored to be a passion of yours. So look at we are on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, Twitter. Please follow our pages. We put a lot of information out there regarding volunteer opportunities that we have, but also programs that we're doing and highlighting different initiatives that we have. So the biggest thing in the South, get to know us. We want you to know us, because that'll take things to the next step. And always, we're 501c3. We welcome donations. We run campaigns all the time. How can we get more in-kind donations, but how can we get more monetary donations? So we want to be able to really continue to drive that sort of interest in getting that technology in the hands of these underserved communities. So we're asking for you to get involved, follow us on our different socials, learn more about us. And we ask the most precious thing that each and every one of you have. We ask for your time, and your time is the most treasurable thing to us. And we ask you for that. So help us to raise awareness for the work that we do.
Excellent. Excellent. That's fantastic, Richard. Thank you so much. What a great cause too. And I'm glad we're able to reconnect and help with the messaging for Inspire EDU to be able to share and spread the word for the good works that you guys are doing. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. In addition to the community work that AITP does, bringing you these meetings as far as different topics and technology topics and discussions and whatnot. We also support the community as much as we can. One of those efforts is actually partnering with another organization, Technology Students Association, which Georgette can tell you a little bit more. But before we get into that, and she shares a little bit more on that organization, I do want to thank our sponsors. Because we've not been meeting face-to-face, our sponsors are an incredibly important part of of keeping these meetings going on. So I first would like to thank our annual bronze sponsor, Transformation Lead, which happens to be Georgette's organization. Georgette, would you like to share a few things about Transformation Lead?
Definitely. So in addition to being a wonderful board member of AITP Atlanta, I am the founder and CEO of Transformation Lead. We are an IT digital transformation company based here in Atlanta, but we are global. So we have clients all over the globe. And we're transformation leaders that have a passion for innovation and getting IT enterprise projects done right. We know that 70% of digital transformation efforts fail, and we help organizations be part of that 30% that get it done. So we are proud to sponsor AITP for 2020 and 2021. And we're also, Steve mentioned about TSA. TSA is another organization that AITP Atlanta has partnered with for a while, as well as CompTIA Incorporated. If you guys know the A+ organization, we're affiliated with them as well. But TSA is a student organization that helps promote technology and innovation and STEM within middle school and high school students. And they do some amazing work from robotics to building systems to cybersecurity. And I've judged the events in person before, and it has blown my mind, the talent that these students have. So Georgia TSA, it's a national organization and it's full of thousands of students, but Georgia TSA is looking for IT professionals and STEM leaders to serve as judges for this virtual event this month. So the event is from the 20th to the 27th, and there's no specific time frame for volunteers to be able to help. So if you are interested in being a volunteer to help judge some of the students' IT work, and you may be able to find some amazing talent and interns possibly for your organizations to come help out. But the competition is the 20th to the 27th, and they're looking for judges right now. So we sent out a blast earlier. We'll probably send one out after this meeting to give you more information about judging with TSA. But we love to give back. And again, as the founder and CEO of Transformation Lead, thank you so much, AITP. And it's a pleasure to be, and I'm looking forward to tonight's event.
Thanks, Georgette. And yes, you have not seen innovation until you've seen a middle schooler come up with a solution that most adults would never even fathom, right? Without the blockades that these kids have that come up when you get a little bit older, the creativity is just amazing. I sat on it and was a judge when we were doing it face to face, and it was very self-rewarding. So please consider volunteering your time being a judge. Next, I want to thank Synergis, our silver sponsor, annual silver sponsor. They've been a great partner. Shout out to their marketing team who continues to help promote our events, as well as help us out with the post-event write-ups. Definitely visit their website because there's some really good stuff. But I would like to introduce Brian Huey. He's the Vice President of Operations for Synergis, to give us a little bit overview of what they do and a few shining pieces of what Synergis is all about.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and thank you to AITP and all the attendees for being here today for what I'm sure is going to be just a fascinating discussion on drones. But Synergis, we are an IT and creative and marketing staffing and services company. We're headquartered here in Atlanta. We have offices in San Francisco and Los Angeles, but we have clients and consultants that work for us across the country. Primarily what we do is we partner with corporations out there. It could be small, mid-sized market or enterprise companies as they are looking to either add on technical staff for a particular project, or maybe they want to hire somebody full-time and they want to utilize us for supplemental recruiting resources to go out there and identify some best talent for them to interview and consider. And then we do the same thing on the marketing and creative side. So really think of us as anything that would report up and down the CIO line, as well as anything that might report up and down the CMO line. Those are the areas of business that we specialize in. So if anybody out there is having a tough time finding the talent you need to meet your project deadlines, or you're looking to grow your team, we would certainly love to talk to you and see if we could be of service. Thank you, Steve.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it. Again, I can't say how much Synergis' support, Transformation Lead support really helps us bring these events and topical discussions to the table. So thank you all very much. Okay, if you could key off your video, with the exception of Mr. Kallman, we will just kind of jump right into the conversation. So Jessie, thank you again for volunteering your time. I had met Jessie a long while back when Airbus Aerial was first popping into the Atlanta market, and Jessie has been a part of the Atlanta landscape for quite a long time. So Jessie, if you could just start off by giving us a quick overview of your background and how you became so entrenched in UAS and drones.
Sure. And I guess first, thanks for having me here. It's great to be here. Great to talk to everybody. So yeah, I've been in unmanned systems pretty much my whole career. So I actually came to Atlanta first, and how I got started in all of it was actually here at Georgia Tech. So came in as an undergrad at Tech and got involved in some research early on. A lot of people don't know this, but also Georgia Tech has a great research facility in Georgia Tech Research Institute up at Dobbins Air Force Base. So I was a co-op there, getting to crawl around in wind tunnels and do a lot of fun testing on drones for the military, while I was still an undergrad. And, really, really enjoyed that. Got to learn, hands-on how to build them, how to design them, how to optimize the aerodynamics of a lot of these aircraft. So great experience. I stayed at Tech for my master's, and there got, more focused on sort of the FAA and how the FAA was looking to integrate not just unmanned systems, but also how it was reshaping the entire air traffic management system here in the US. So there's a lot of research underway at Georgia Tech in that, got heavily involved in that. After Tech, moved to DC, was working in consulting at Booz Allen, and lo and behold, my first customer was the same group that I worked with when I was at Georgia Tech. And, we were this is very early days of trying to integrate UAVs into the US airspace. So there's a lot of challenges of, hey, we're changing all these systems around, and we're going to have new ways of communicating with aircraft, and how we're going to, manage aircraft, things like that. And, the question came of, well, what do we do about UAVs or drones, and how's that going to work? So got to work on some really interesting projects there at the FAA, and also other projects in the defense world. After several years, realized the pace of the federal government is not exactly what I enjoy the most, and did a complete career 180, moved out to California with some friends, actually a couple of friends that I knew from Georgia Tech, had left Boeing and were starting a drone company out there. And originally the company was focused on autonomy for small unmanned systems. So we were building flight control hardware and software that essentially you could put into any UAV at that time and turn it into a fully autonomous tool for a lot of different industries. So really, really great. And, we grew that company up. Later it was developing enterprise software. We were helping large Fortune 500s and 100s implement drones into their own businesses. When I had left that company, I got recruited by Airbus. They wanted to build a drone business and, commercially. And I kind of went into Airbus and saw all the great stuff they were doing, outside of just drones. Like, a lot of people aren't aware that they're one of the largest satellite data providers. They do a lot of really cool work on high altitude UAVs. So it's not just the small stuff or the small fixed wing stuff that people see, but, full solar wing flying at 60,000 feet, can fly for a month at a time, and, lots of really great capabilities. So we ended up building a business that later became called Airbus Aerial here in Atlanta, that fused drones, high altitude unmanned systems, satellite, but it was really focused on helping customers solve problems. So taking that data, combining it with analytics, and using some software to help, say, an insurance company, adjudicate claims after a major wildfire, as opposed to just saying, here's a cool drone. We're saying we're actually going to help you solve your core challenge. So that business, once it's that startup sort of matured, merged in with the bigger satellite unit for Airbus, and that team is still operating today. I actually left Airbus a few weeks ago, going back into now doing another startup. So I just really enjoy building companies and getting to do that kind of work. So that's kind of quick overview and kind of where I'm at today.
Oh, that's fantastic. There's all kinds of dovetail questions I could go off onto that, but let's kind of stay with some of the stuff that I've got lined up here. I want to start off a little bit basic. As I mentioned to you when we kind of prepared for this, AITP's audience is a generalist of IT professionals from early stage career on up to C-level executives. In varying domains. So some of the folks, everybody's heard of drones from a hobby and whatnot, but when we hear the terms UAS, UAV, drones, are they all the same thing? Is there specific definitions for each?
I mean, it's all pretty much the same thing. I mean, it's different ways of calling it. I mean, I know maybe 4 or 5 years ago, even maybe further back, a lot of people didn't like using the word drone because it had this sort of negative military connotation. Yeah. So that's when UAS or UAV became very popular, especially commercially, right? People thought of the scary Predator drone with missiles on it. And, it's pretty different from a little camera quadcopter that's, looking at a rooftop or something like that. So it's all the same thing. I think drone has been probably the most commonly used term, where UAV or UAS are more industry specific terms. But yeah, it's all, and there's also another school of thought of calling them RPAS, so remotely piloted. So some people are saying, well, they're not, autonomous, or they're not, unmanned. They're just piloted remotely. So some people like calling them RPAS as well, but it's all the same thing.
Well, and look, as these things grow in popularity, as the use cases grow, of course, you're going to have segmented titles for everything, as marketing teams have a tendency to do, right? But speaking of the growth in the industry stood at, I'm just looking at my notes, 19.3 billion in 2019, according to Deloitte. And they've predicted in more than one source that industry is going to reach out to 45 billion by 2025. And I'm kind of curious, there's a lot of different use cases that I've seen around it, a lot of great success stories that are very helpful. But what do you think is going to be the core driver to that growth from where we're at today to where it's going to be then?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's driven a lot of those early market reports, and I'll say I'm still a bit of a skeptic on some of these market reports because I've seen some crazy numbers out there. But I think in general, like, what's really been driving it the last few years has been a huge amount of growth in sort of the enterprise drone market, where 4 or 5 years ago that market was tiny. And now with some of the FAA rules changing, and obviously there's still a lot more to go, but a lot of bigger companies now are getting into it. And it's not uncommon now to find out about, Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies having fleets of hundreds of these drones or unmanned aircraft to perform a number of different, inspection type applications like that. So there's been a huge amount of growth in sort of enterprise. The consumer market continues to still be the biggest by far. Where companies like DJI out of China, and there's a new, well, not really that new, but a company here in the US called Skydio, also making great, highly autonomous unmanned systems for enthusiasts, but also for enterprises. But anyway, there's been a lot of growth in consumer, and the amount of people that are adopting it and using it for, following them while they go on the bike ride through the mountains, or while you're out on the boat or swimming around at the lake, just getting great shots. And and it's becoming really, really widely used. If you look at Zillow and a lot of the real estate market now, and you look on some of the photos, you'll notice there's a lot of drone shots out there, whether shot by a company or by the realtor themselves. So it's been all over enterprise and commercial, but military is still a very big market as well. That's sort of where it all started.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Now I work with an organization that they actually do assessment of the vegetation that's grown over power lines. Yep. Right. And they kind of do that assessment, and that all that GIS data that's collected helps the utility companies to figure out and get ahead of those power outages and whatnot. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I find interesting is they haven't quite adopted a drone solution yet, because it's still not as cost effective as rolling the trucks out. And there's got to be that line of delineation. And I think I would assume that the regulations from the FAA, all those different components and the complexities around, our drone's really going to be messed up with our airwaves, and it's going to get messed up with all the different. So do you think that's kind of the hindrance to some of the innovation that comes with drones and UFE, the compliance component?
Yeah, I mean, the regulations are obviously still a challenge. So you mentioned the power line survey application, and we've done on the Airbus side, and even before that, I've done a lot of work in that market. And the issue has been getting to that price point where you're way more effective than, say, not just trucks on the ground, but it's pretty common today that a lot of these power companies are using traditional fixed wing aircraft like a Cessna with a payload on the wing that's either collecting imagery or LiDAR data to get 3D modeling just to track vegetation encroachment, things like that. But those are still relatively low cost options. And drones today, when you can only fly them typically within the line of sight of the operator, you're still kind of stuck to a pretty closed in area, where I think where they want to get to is where you could take a small fixed wing drone and fly it 20 miles down a power line or even further, and be able to survey it on demand and not have to call out the contractor with the Cessna to come fly it. And you can be able to collect it yourself, and you can expand the area you can collect. You can easily change sensors. So, there's a lot of flexibility that comes with that. And a lot of it is hinging on these, what's called beyond visual line of sight regulations. Now a lot has changed there the last few years. Like the Airbus team in Atlanta was doing some trials in North Dakota with a power company up there, being able to fly very long range in some remote areas, but the rules are still evolving. Some companies are getting limited permits to do that, but it's not widespread yet. Gotcha.
Interesting. So I'm kind of curious. I want to switch up the topic to a little bit more kind of the startup industry, right? You get something like this, it's very attractive. You got the personal and the individual piece. You've got the industry component to it, but I know that Atlanta has a huge growing investment group, right? It's just the startup community here, which I'm thrilled to see, keeps popping up. And I believe you yourself are helping out with some startups and whatnot. Do you see any specific area that investors are looking at specifically within drones and UAS?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few areas. I mean, I would say the hottest area for investment right now is not technically drones. There's a new sub-segment called urban air mobility. This is a lot of what you see, like the vertical takeoff, air taxi market. That's been a big area for investment the last few years. And you've even seen there's been a few of those companies that have gone public through some of these SPAC IPO acquisitions. So there, that part of the market has seen a lot of investment the last few years. I would say on the small UAS, where I've seen a lot of the investment focus the last few years has been in sort of the enterprise software space. So the companies that can go and provide software to those power companies or to the insurance companies to help them sort of turn that data into, what a lot of folks would call actionable intelligence. And I know we've got an IT professional group here, and these are for folks that are in different parts of the enterprise that may not particularly care that it came from a drone or an airplane or a satellite, but they need data integrated into whatever enterprise system they have. And there's been a lot of investment in that space of folks that can take it from a cool picture of a power line or a stretch of power line into cut these 3 trees and dispatch these crews to go do it. And I think that those are where the companies where I've seen a lot of investment going, where you get to these sort of more SaaS-like businesses as opposed to, a traditional services business.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I personally am curious, right? Data is king. It's all the organizations are looking for that data that's collected by these autonomous vehicles or the drones that are being controlled by people remotely. But you have had the blessing of being able to see some of the coolest hardware art stuff that's being developed out there. I'm kind of curious, is there anything that you've seen that's kind of like the next generation that's coming up? Is there anything on the Jetsons that is on the horizon that we haven't seen or heard about yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really, really cool, interesting stuff. I mean, so the Atlanta team that we started here is still working on some really cool technologies around high altitude UAVs. And so I mentioned before, so Airbus has an aircraft called the Zephyr. You can Google search Airbus Zephyr, but it's an all solar electric powered aircraft that can fly at 60,000 feet for a month at a time. And you can imagine there's a lot of really interesting applications when you could put that kind of capability for that kind of persistence in the air, and you're way above weather and a lot of these other challenges. So some really fascinating stuff going on in sort of the high altitude world. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. It's not quite UAVs, but in sort of the electrification of aircraft. So there's a lot of really cool startups popping up that are taking traditionally, gasoline powered aircraft and turning them full electric. Technically, these are also UAVs, but there's some really cool startups that are turning traditionally manned aircraft into fully autonomous unmanned aircraft. So you can imagine, say, like a Cessna Caravan that can now, taxi, take off, fly its route, land, and taxi back, fully autonomous without a human being in it. So for the cargo market and some other markets, you can see the applications there and the flexibility that you have when, the pilots can now one pilot can control 10 aircraft as opposed to needing 2 pilots to fly into 1 aircraft every day. Wow.
Yeah, that's some next gen stuff, right? And the applications are crazy. I mean, I just think about just the analysis of weather patterns, being able to fly above in that stratosphere and be able to go in there. That's.
Yeah, I mean, the amount that the technology's advanced the last few years is pretty incredible. So I mentioned that other company, Skydio, here in the U.S. I think they just became one of the first commercial drone companies to be valued at over $1 billion in the latest funding round. But they produce some incredible small UAVs for both the consumer and enterprise market that are completely autonomous, that you don't have to pilot them at all. They can follow you through the woods. They can avoid trees, keep the camera on you, and take some really cool shots. But again, all done through software and onboard autonomy. It's pretty incredible what can be done.
And it's interesting. I think about some of the past speakers we've had talking about. We had Chris DeBellis talk about computer vision, right, and the stuff that he's done. That he spent 2 years just making a robot's arm moved for like a 30-second activity, and all those, and then of course the deep learning, like Chris Benson and the work he's done from Lockheed Martin and Honeywell, and all that. All of this stuff seems like it's converging into helping that drone and UAV market actually take off and really advance to where it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, given again, we've got so many IT professionals here. I mean, a lot of this market is being driven by software, right? A lot of this is software driven. You mentioned computer vision. I mean, that's one of the key pieces of technology behind a lot of these autonomy companies that are building a lot of these incredible products. It's it's really heavily software driven.
Interesting. Yeah, and I imagine there's advancements there. There's advancements all over the place when it comes to all this stuff, right?
Yep.
Kind of flipping over and moving away from the hardware and software component, but going into some of the more complex legal and policy issues related to drones that have yet to be resolved. Just like any other technology that has fast-paced advancement, the legislation and regulation have a tendency to really kind of bog that component down and not stay up with it. Mm-hmm. Is there, I guess, what do you see as the biggest impediment? Is the FAA the biggest impediment to the advancement of drones and the adoption for businesses and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people place blame on the FAA, and having been there, I know it's, people want to blame them, but it's also, they have to look at the safety of the entire U.S. airspace system. And I think there's a trade-off as to, okay, well, we're talking about small, especially the small quadcopters and things like that. What's really the risk there? And they have to be cognizant of sort of how much risk are they willing to allow in the system. And I think the core issues stem all the way back to this whole concept of a pilot not being on the aircraft and then defining UAVs as aircraft, right? And regulating them as such. So when the pilot's not on there, they can't perform certain duties that you normally would, like, for example, seeing and avoiding other airplanes. So I'm a pilot myself for fun. And, one of the things you have to do when you're flying around is make sure you don't fly in another airplane, right? So, that's an important thing that they haven't been able to prove and certify yet. But I mentioned some of these companies and what they're doing with some of these computer vision applications is you can do that through synthetic vision, using vision systems, radar systems, and other systems to detect what's around you. But that's been one of the biggest regulatory impediments, is being able to prove and certify that. But then you get into a lot of other areas too, around what you can and can't overfly and the different altitudes and what airspace you can access. And there's been a lot of work done the last even 10 years or so on getting access to airspace for these UAVs. And today they've rolled out some really, really amazing, some of the stuff we did at Airbus, for example, comes down to a program called Lance that they have, where essentially you can get now automated access to airspace, where you don't have to file these complex waivers. You can actually real time submit an approval to, say, fly 2-3 miles outside of Hartsfield, say at a low altitude, and say, I'd like to fly 20 feet over this house. What's the risk, right? And the airport can clearly say, yep, no risk in that. You're approved real time, right? So that's not something that existed a few years ago, and that's helping also access or provide more access to airspace. So it's about certifying the aircraft and the operation, but it's also about getting access to airspace. So all of these things have evolved, I would say, night and day just in the last 4 or 5 years. But still a long way to go.
Yeah. No, I imagine, but it's good to hear it's making progress, right?
Yeah.
And there was actually, just really quick, I'm going to take a quick pause. Everybody, as we're having this discussion, you probably got a few questions that are going to be popping up. We're going to be opening up. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Just feel free to throw those questions in and we'll be able to get those addressed. Hopefully we might be able to open it up for live discussion, but we'll see how much time we have left. But there is one question that came in through the chat that kind of falls into the regulatory component, and that's a privacy component.
Yeah.
You've got individuals who are hobbyists who have their drones that they're flying around all over the place and making recordings and whatnot. You've got high altitude vehicles, you've got commercial uses, and you're touching into a bunch of different areas. At the same time, you got states like Virginia that are putting individual data privacy policies into play. How much of a factor is that individual privacy being put into play when it comes to solutions within the drone and UAV industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think privacy has always been a big concern. I mean, both for the manufacturers and those that are impacted by it. I think, I think there's some other corollaries that I've seen when people talk about this, because a lot of people don't also realize that there's a pretty robust manned aircraft, like, for example, survey and mapping business, where there's Cessna's mapping, the city of Atlanta probably pretty frequently, right? Collecting high resolution data and providing it. So I think drones have changed it where it's more in your face. When you see that buzzing quadcopter, you can hear it, you can see it. But satellites are mapping a lot of these areas on a almost daily basis. And I think drones obviously are more invasive because you see them. So I think there's been a lot of really interesting discussions around how do you regulate that from a privacy perspective. And my personal view is that you have to treat it like any other device, right? So someone can still record things on a cell phone, and so I just view it as another device. It's not a fundamentally different thing. It becomes more of a hot button issue because it's so, I guess it's because it's newer. So I've seen different states do it different ways. I think what most folks in this industry want to avoid is a large patchwork of regulations that go county by county, state by state, because it's really hard for the industry to cope with that. So I think the FAA is typically regulating the devices and the operations and the aircraft themselves. But obviously, when it comes to when you land and touch down in certain areas, then you can get into scenarios where the states and the counties and cities can start regulating some of those things, and they are. So, but I think it's challenging for the industry to track, but fully understand the concerns that folks have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you've got the California Data Protection Act. Of course, you've got GDPR that's popping around. It's just such a hot button issue. I'm surprised it's not. I'm sure it is. Privacy is discussed in industry a lot more. But I personally think of, hey, well, Google's over top mapping my backyard. I can literally see me walking around in my backyard in a couple of the photos that they've taken from the satellite. So. Yep. What's the line of delineation from that privacy component? It's a hard nut to crack. So,
yeah.
We talked a little bit about the personal use, the individual use of drones. We talked a little bit about a couple of use cases when it comes to drones in the industry side and the enterprise adoption. But is there anything from a use case from a commercial side that you see that might put a spotlight in help advancing some of the drone stuff that's going on? Is there any particular industry that you see that's growing? I mean, we mentioned the utility companies utilizing the drones, but what other companies do you see adopting the drones piece, and what kind of use case is driving that?
I've seen it all over the place. I think one that I've been heavily involved in is in the insurance market. Like, for example, actually, one of the first projects I did in a company before Airbus was implementing drone technology for companies like State Farm and others. And you think about it, here in Atlanta, this was actually one of the first trial areas we rolled that out with State Farm for hail hits, and specifically in sort of Georgia for 2-story and steep roofs where teams of 2 people would have to climb up on these roofs and sometimes fall off and get injured, just looking and counting hail hits. So I think one of the interesting applications is now that adjuster can do that inspection from the ground. They can see many more houses, and I think the impact to the insureds has been huge because they're now getting claims paid much faster than they were before. So I think for drones and a lot of folks that aren't as close to it, I think when it starts to touch their daily lives and they see the benefit, they realize these things really are going to make a big difference. I think for the utility companies, things like that, it's pretty distant from general consumers because it's inspecting remote infrastructure, but drones as a tool to inspect things like bridges. We had a really interesting project here in Atlanta to tie it back to Atlanta with the Atlanta airport, where we were actually flying drones on the runways of Hartsfield and being able to do pavement surveys much faster than ground teams could, and therefore you don't have to close the runways as long. It saves money, it saves time. It helps free up traffic and things like that because you don't have a runway closed for days or several days, right? So the amount of applications are just they're pretty limitless. Again, in agriculture, there's a lot of uses for things like yield prediction, finding disease in crops before they spread. People are doing that from airplanes, satellites, but drones can obviously help when you need really high resolution, in certain key areas, especially for high value crops. I've seen them used in wineries and things like that for that application. But yeah, I mean, even in the oil and gas and pipeline inspections, and I could go on, but there's a lot of applications.
Sure. And I imagine you can get really specialized when I think about sensor data, right? And predictive and prescriptive analytics. I know a couple of companies that do it for like rail train engines, right? They kind of go on, they put their sensors in, they do predictive and prescriptive analytics. If you're doing, air quality control or something along those lines, I can only imagine that you can affix those types of sensors onto there. And that just, it's all about your imagine is only as bound as your own the type of thought process when you come about the solutions you can do. So
yeah, I mean, really cool and even I've been talking a lot about some of the enterprise applications for inspection, but here in Georgia, one of the biggest uses for UAVs here in Georgia is in the film industry. You've got flying cameras, right? So, instead of some of these big camera rigs, you can now have complete flexibility of putting cinema quality cameras on a UAV. And that's a huge use case, especially here in Georgia with how much is going on in the film industry. So there's probably 20, 30 companies alone here that just do that.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't even think about the film industry side of things. That is some cool stuff.
Yeah.
So with the, I mean, this is, the potential is huge. I can definitely see where, unlike some other of these reports that pop out as far as the growth of different technologies might be off, this might actually be on. And and again, I mentioned we got a wide audience here, right? And some of them are even students who are involved in this too. So a question from Dara Merlin from Chorus 360 popped up about really kind of career paths, right? Are schools actually having careers specific towards drones and UAVs? Obviously, there's the coding piece and whatnot, but how would you recommend somebody, what would you recommend somebody start studying school if they're interested in getting in this particular area, engineering, technology, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, they do. I mean, a lot of, I don't know, you can outright major in it in a lot of places, but like, for example, here in Atlanta at Georgia Tech, they've got one of the best labs in the country for doing this. And you get a lot of hands-on experience designing it. There's also these design, build, fly competitions that go on around the country. It's done at a high school level, a college level, where teams of students will actually build UAVs and compete against each other in challenges. And I know a lot of companies love students that have that experience because they have real hands-on experience in actually operations, design. So I would definitely, I've recommended this. I still do some sort of mentoring at the their aerospace school at Georgia Tech. And that's one that I recommend strongly for students, is to get involved in those design, build, fly competitions. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people that come into the drone industry come from a couple places. They can come the traditional aerospace route. I know a lot of people that have come that have no aerospace background whatsoever, but they've come in via their own software background, and folks that are really strong on sort of geospatial software as well. So they're good with data, they're data analytics. So I've seen people come in a lot of different ways. There's also a lot of pilots that come in to the industry where maybe they were flying helicopters or manned aircraft and they become drone pilots, and there's a big business just doing that as well. So some people come in the pilot route. As far as I've been asked a lot, where should students focus on earlier in their education? Obviously, the math and science fronts, but drones are a cool sort of hands-on type thing. So for folks that love getting their hands dirty and building things and working with computers and electronics, and that's what most of these drones are, right? They're just little flying computers with some cameras on them or some other sensor. And for folks that really enjoy doing that, they have a big future in this industry.
No, that's great. That's great. So everybody from Paul Duke High School's drone club who might be listening to this, you're on the right path. So keep rolling into it. That is kind of a big list of the questions that I had prepared. But in your discussion, some of the things you talked about, a couple of things pop up into my mind, and really I think a comparison, because we've had Tom Taylor come and talk about autonomous vehicles, and kind of when he spoke about where we were on autonomous vehicles, it was less about that and more about the infrastructure to be able to have those cars stay connected. And you alluded to this fact, right? Where right now the drones are limited by line of sight versus being able to go 20 miles down a power line. What is there a infrastructure, or is there a wireless technology that is yet to be developed that's preventing it from having that kind of longevity out there, or is it really just a matter of energy consumption and being released?
It's a mix, right? I mean, same as the electric vehicle or autonomous ground vehicle market. I mean, batteries are, they do dictate a lot of what you can do with some of these aircraft. There are gas powered or hybrid powered aircraft out there that can fly quite a long time. But yeah, I mean, the limiting factor for a lot of these technologies is the batteries. I mean, the other piece of technology that's really critical is how you communicate with the UAVs long range. So obviously, if you're line of sight, you can just use pretty general radio communications. But I've seen the use of cell technology in a lot of drones. So like when you're flying longer range, to be able to use the cell network to communicate with the aircraft and continue controlling it, or getting video from it to make sure obviously you're not going to collide with something. And that's how a lot of pilots are doing it if it's not automated on board. And I've seen also a lot of companies now switch over for, especially the remote applications where you don't have cell coverage, or at least good or consistent cell coverage, you're having to use satellite communications. There's some really interesting stuff going on with companies like Inmarsat, where they're creating small, really small form factor, low power systems where you can put it on a small drone, and now you've got access to satellite communication, and your range is now unlimited as long as you have the power on board to do it. And even some of the satellite constellations like OneWeb or Starlink, being able to provide high bandwidth communications everywhere, right? So now you're talking not just the ability to control the airplane, but actually bring video data and all kinds of other payload data that's higher bandwidth over these satellite networks. So I think these are some areas where things and new technologies are still evolving that I think the industry really needs.
Gotcha. All right, we got another question, and I am going to open it up to questions here, folks. So anything you want, please type it into the Q&A as well as the chat area. I'm kind of monitoring both, but quick question from Tom. When do you think the FAA will allow beyond line of sight for no population applications like power line inspection?
So they're doing some of it now, but you still have to get specific permits. So I think what you're looking for is when are they going to have a blanket rule? Like right now there's something called Part 107, which is the general rules for flying line of sight. And that's, smaller UAVs, low altitude. And I think where they want to get to is that sort of a general blanket rule that allows everyone to do it without getting the specific approval. So today you can do it via very specific approval. And I mentioned that the thing that the Airbus team is doing up in North Dakota with the power line. So we could fly beyond line of sight in unpopulated areas. And we had that approval, but for a very specific area. As far as having it blanket for the whole country, I would say we're still years away from that happening, unfortunately. I don't think it's 5+ years, but I think we're on the order of magnitude of we're talking probably a couple of years until you get to a scenario where, so long as you meet certain requirements, you now have access to fly it in a much, much broader area without having to get specific approval each time.
Gotcha. No. Cool. Thanks. Got a question from Joshua Farley. Are there companies that need drone pilots in the Atlanta area if they are licensed?
A good question. I have to sort of try to remember the names of all these companies. But yes, absolutely. I know that there's many. I would say probably the ones that are hiring the most, at least that I've seen, are the ones in the film industry. I'm drawing a blank on some of the specific company names, but if you probably Google search drone videography companies Atlanta, you'll probably find a whole lot of them. I'm blanking on the specific names. If I have to pull up, I'd have to pull up some LinkedIn and Google searches for you, but there's a lot. There's a lot in the city.
Excellent. That's cool. Well, I'm going to throw one into my own. I think about the conversations we've had on autonomous vehicles. I think about the drone market, and then I think, when are we going to be able to hop into that flying car that's not going to require a pilot and take us from point A to point B? Is that something that's actually realistic that we might see in the next 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look up, I would say the company that's closest to being there is one called Joby Aviation. And they're telling people that they think by 2024, 2025, they're going to have the certification required to be able to do that. And I think I would say that's probably a bit optimistic, but I don't think it's 15 years away. But I think we're in the order of 5 to 10 years of being able to have, in some limited, this is not like widespread, but I would say in some limited areas, right? Not over big populations, but being able to have these aircraft certified to start carrying people in them, I don't think it's 10, 15 years away.
Interesting. So at the very least, we're going to at least probably see our packages, a drone deliver our packages from UPS and our pizza delivered from Domino's. And I know Domino's has actually done a test case on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, Google and Amazon's programs are operational. I mean, a lot of those operations are in other countries, but, in the US, they are doing it. It's just, same as the question before about when is it going to be widespread? It all just comes down to the rules, because right now they're doing it, but in only very specific areas and on specific routes where they have approval. They can't just do it everywhere. So I know Google's doing it in like rural parts of Virginia. Amazon's been doing it in a number of different places. I know they've done it in Europe as well. So, it's coming. It's just really a, regulatory step into it, let it expand and expand from where it is today, which is pretty limited.
Interesting. All right, folks, any other questions that are popping up on the mind? This is really a pretty neat topic, and we've got a wide range of things that we can discuss, from artificial intelligence and the adoption of AI into the drone component. But please feel free to pop your questions in, because I want to make use of Jessie's time. But, in speaking of the AI and machine learning component, right? And I know that deep learning for the autonomous component's got to be a big component. I think we've all seen in the Olympics when China had the patterns and the drones flying up and doing pictures in the sky and whatnot. I've seen some pretty cool stuff around there. Is that traditional AI type work that's being done from a drone's perspective, or has there been some leaps and advancements in AI to be able to apply that to drones and unmanned vehicles?
I mean, a lot of it is in the area we talked about before. It's around computer vision. So, I mean, there's been a lot of advancements in onboard processing and some of the sensors that are being used. That allow you to do a lot more real time on board the aircraft and consume a lot more data. And similarly to the automated vehicle space, LiDAR technology is getting more prevalent. A lot of the autonomous ground vehicle companies, there's a big debate on using LiDAR versus radar versus vision systems, and different companies have their views on it. But at the end of the day, all these sensors are getting cheaper and smaller and requiring less power and less compute power. So that's only benefits the drone industry, where the weight and the power is much more critical than it is when you have a ground vehicle. So all of that stuff is evolving a lot, and what you can sort of compute on board the drone and what the drone can sense and how reactive it can be. I mean, again, look at that company Skydio. If you look at some of the videos of what they can do on board a very small drone, is super impressive.
Awesome. So another question popped up from Charles, and he asks, who are the current big players? Obviously, you mentioned Skydio, or up and coming players in the drone space?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a few. There's an interesting company that I've talked to recently called Vantage Robotics that's focusing on small UAVs for the military market. Very interesting what they're doing from a sort of modular payload standpoint. Skydio, I would say, is probably the leader in the US right now when it comes to the multi-rotor systems. There's a lot going on the military side of things. So I don't know if you're interested in sort of military or commercial, but the military side of things, there's a really interesting company that I've seen that just broke a couple of records for flight endurance called Vanilla Aircraft, where they can now fly a pretty large UAV for 5 days straight. This is a gas-powered aircraft. So it's a lot of payload. Obviously, Airbus and Boeing are doing a ton in sort of the larger aircraft side. Really interesting work going on at a company called Aurora Flight Sciences that got acquired by Boeing when it comes to aircraft autonomy. So I'm not quite sure if you want to know more about sort of aircraft autonomy, small UAVs for consumer, commercial, or enterprise. But anyway, lots going on here in the US. And obviously still DJI is still the biggest player when it comes to the small stuff, and they're out of China.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it was just a general industry and some of the names that are popping up. And one of the things I'm curious about, and I always love talking to people who get involved in the startup market, right? Especially in the Atlanta area. And obviously there's some stuff that's some confidential, but in the folks that you're dealing with in the startup market, is there any success stories or kind of innovative organizations that you're working with or that you've seen that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I've seen some really, really amazing stuff in the new sort of defense world, where the defense world's changing a lot, where you needed a big company before and lots of contracting power and past performance records, but they're changing a lot of how that's being done today. And there's a lot more startups that may not have a lot of familiarity with government contracting that are now able to get pretty sizable contracts, because the government wants to be able to enable the commercial world here a lot a lot better than they have in the last several years. So I would say there's been some really innovative stuff done on the DoD side of things from a cargo delivery standpoint. So if you look at a couple companies, one called Elroy Air or another one called Volanzi, that have been doing some really cool stuff with the military on delivery of equipment and supplies, to help keep, pilots and other folks out of harm's way to be able to bring in supplies to certain areas and just general logistics work. Obviously here in Atlanta, UPS has a great program when it comes to delivery in their flight forward program. So for folks here in the Atlanta area, I mean, that's obviously a local company and they're doing some of that work up in Louisville, but it's great to see that kind of stuff going on here in Atlanta and what they're able to do from a drone delivery standpoint and some of the startups that they're partnered with.
Oh, that's fantastic. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And I know that the applications when it comes to government and defense is probably driving a lot of this. But it's really great to hear that you can startups can get involved and they're opening it up a little bit more. Because it's just that was such a huge barrier before to be able to break into some of those contracts and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. They've changed the vehicles. I mean, if there's anyone here that's looking at that, there's a couple things, one called Agility Prime, more for like the mobility market, and also AF Works through the Air Force is doing a lot more contracting with smaller startups and things like that may not be, big defense contractors.
Awesome. That's great. Anybody else have anything that is on the top of their head as far as drones go? All right. Well, we are just popping up at the top of our hour, so timing is just great for running out of questions for you, Jessie. I want to thank you actually, before I wrap it up, is there anything else that you kind of want to finish us off with that you might want to share with the audience in general about the space?
No, I mean, I just, thanks for the invite. It's been great to be here. I mean, I love the Atlanta community. There's tons of great stuff going on here. And, I think for the folks here in Atlanta, just if this is something that you're interested in, keep a close eye out because there's tons and tons of stuff going on, and happy to be helpful and happy to be here in Atlanta.
Excellent. Again, Jessie, thank you so much for volunteering your time. We appreciate our audience, our members, everyone truly appreciates the time that you've given us. Thank you again to our sponsors, Synergis, our silver sponsor, Brian Huey, thanks for saying a few words. Georgette, always a pleasure. Transformation Lead. And of course, Richard Hicks, thank you for telling us about your story with Inspire EDU. It's a fantastic organization. And again, if you want to support them, please, donations on equipment, monetary donations, and of course, become a member of AITP, in addition to all of the benefits that you're going to get through our organization. And knock on wood, we're going to be back doing face-to-face meetings again, which has a huge piece of the value of being a member. You get the additional benefit of knowing that there's going to be a sizable contribution made to Inspire EDU by becoming a member of AITP Atlanta. So thank you very much. Next month, the topic is going to be 3D printing. Very much similar to this, we're going to have a conversation with a industry subject matter expert, talking less about the home applications and much more about the commercial applications, to hopefully talking a little bit about liquid metal and some of the advancements on that side too. So more information to come. Keep an eye out on your email. We'll be making a few announcements. Thank you everybody for your time. Stay safe. Continue to mask up so we can see you at our next live event. Have a great night. Thanks again, Jessie. Appreciate the time.
Good to be here. Thank you, everybody.
So long, everybody.